is going on. This is an everyday analysis podcast. So it's going on our YouTube channel.
Okay, cool.
I probably will leave that in because
Yeah, leave it all
I
in.
have to go and edit it, and who has time for that? So, welcome to this conversation on the Everyday Analysis show on our YouTube channel. I don't know. I just sort of decided to do some informal conversations because we've been meaning to have a conversation for ages. But this year ended up getting really sort of busy. But today, I was about to say we, the royal we. I'm here with my very good friend Emmalea Russo, poetess, novelist, amazing human being, brilliant writer. And we're going to talk about her first novel, Vivienne, which is coming out in paperback soon. Is that right?
Yeah, in like a week, June 24th. I have a stack of them next to me. This is what they look like.
Amazing. It is interesting when you flick through because it has a very aesthetic quality to the text itself. Like the text is uh,
Yes.
structured in a certain way, which
Yeah.
we can get
A lot
into.
of formal things.
Yes, a lot
A
of,
little reading.
yeah, no, it's brilliant. And also, it was just announced that you have a second novel coming out. Is that right?
Yeah, in about a year.
And are you in the process of writing that now?
I'm in like the editing rounds right now.
Yeah, very good. And is it related to Vivienne?
Very related.
Okay,
Some
excellent.
of the characters come back.
Brilliant. So basically, I also was like owed you a piece. I wanted to write something about the text as well, which I sort of will do, but it's also weird how sometimes these passages of time, it's not even like being prolific or not prolific. You literally just don't have time to actually sit down and
Yeah.
write something. And I have
Well,
literally,
you've DM'd me some really brilliant thoughts on Vivienne.
maybe you can remind me because I was just thinking, I was like, I know I've written some of these ideas down somewhere. And I was looking through my notes, I was like, no, I haven't. So
Yeah.
maybe I should go to my Instagram DMs and have a look. But I did want to talk about obviously a big theme of this novel is cancel culture, and another theme is aesthetics, being an artist, what it means to be an artist, what it means to be known as an artist, forgotten as an artist, revived as an artist, this kind of thing. One's identity as through recognition and misrecognition. But one thing that really stood out that I thought was kind of interesting was the aesthetics of cancel culture. Because
Mm.
it's a novel about, in some ways, and not to reduce it to this, but there's a big cancel theme thread. And
Mm.
one thing that has always struck me about cancel culture, partly in terms of, we can talk about like the role of cancel culture in the wider economy related to the tendency of the rate of profit to decline. So, a way that subjectivity is mobilized through moralism to get basically affect coin from the subject that it sort of plays out on these digital platforms that are owned by monopoly capitalists, et cetera, et cetera. Um, but one of the ways in which cancel culture is so compelling is its aesthetic quality. And I always think of the terms like discourse terrorism. Like sometimes when one becomes so afraid to address one's public or to speak, um, to articulate ideas in the public realm. Obviously, the question of what the public realm is an important question now that everything has been commoditized by social media. And there are often these modes of shutting things down and of sort of corralling thought via a form of discourse terrorism where you feel like if I say this, this is going to lead me to be perceived as X adjacent, whatever that means. Or, there was a sort of rise of logic in forms of political discourse, in terms of things which explicitly, like if we read the Communist Manifesto, and if we tie Marx to the left, there is a huge criticism of the logic of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So this sort of, if you're not with me, you're against me. It's very similar to this. You're not, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. It's like, no, we always have to negate that negation. We always have to critique the critique. So if you're critiquing the critique in a sort of binary, oppositional, very capitalist, commoditized form of, let's say, political quote unquote discourse that's actually profoundly apolitical, I would say, you end up not being able to articulate things in a dialectical way because as soon as you question a signifier, you're on the side of the oppressor, or whatever. So this sort of calls that form of logic discourse terrorism, but that terroristic cancel culture thing has an aesthetic that is captivating, terrifying, and mobilizes affect in a certain way. I don't know if it's appropriate ever to talk about 9/11 in aesthetic terms, because people obviously, it's like a very serious topic. But if you look at the aesthetics of something like 9/11, this is a very, aside from the actual material number of people that died, etc., the the imagery is so compelling and arresting, and in terms of performance art or as a performance, it is obscenely aesthetically um, powerful. And sometimes these things that occur in terms of cancel culture or that catch on visually, obviously, so much of our public life, quote unquote, our privatized public life is mediated through screen media. It's very visual. So that's sort of a really long-winded setup to get to this idea. Was there something in cancel culture that you wanted to draw towards this question of aesthetics? And is there something aesthetic about cancel culture that makes it so compelling and terrifying?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, kind of, I mean, certainly the way that we're sort of encouraged to like survey each other and be little surveillance machines and HR departments. It's like the cancel culture machinery, which kind of thinks of itself mainly, I guess, as progressive or somehow radical, is very, it's like doing the state's work for it in a sense. And so I kept thinking throughout like this process of writing Vivienne of these ways of using language and being in the world and kind of making assumptions like for me or with me or against me, as you said, that kind of presents itself one way, but has another kind of bland, bleak layer under it, kind of might present itself as this like glittering, freedom, loving thing. But then underneath there's something very conformist, and sort of this idea of maybe like identity without like actual individualism or thinking for oneself or being an individual. And then like of course there's like a sea of commenters and like people reacting to different events in throughout Vivienne, like online. And so thinking about the way that they talk and the different like modes of speaking in YouTube comments or whatever, is very interesting, kind of like the way that we agree with other people or like pile on or maybe like I don't know, accidentally kind of create really interesting poetry or ways of using language that are quite insane and interesting. So I was like in that kind of space and reading. I love reading YouTube comments. So I was like doing a lot of that and specifically reading YouTube comments on like videos from people like or about people or of people who are like controversial in some way or icons, like had these glittering images behind them, like people even like Carolyn Bessette Kennedy or something like this, and like watching how people react to her images of her. So these kind of like
Yeah.
ungraspable figures who have a kind of glamour, but who aren't really, who are either dead or aren't like available in real life, like Vivienne, who's kind of a recluse and old, and people kind of invent these images of her or cling on to certain words about her.
So do you want to talk a little bit about like Vivienne as a character in terms of who she is in the novel and her resurrection via this sort of obscure interest that comes about in her artwork?
Yeah, she's like an 80 something year old woman who was once quite well known partly as the partner, girlfriend of a real artist, Hans Bellmer. So she's like this fictional character that I invented, who had a relationship with Hans Bellmer, the surrealist artist, back in the day, and has since kind of left that world. And then she has a revival. She's part of this exhibition called Forgotten Women Surrealists. And through that process of her revival, a sea of internet commenters kind of pile on her for the alleged killing of Hans Bellmer's first wife or previous wife. So she fell from a window, and people think that Vivienne may have pushed her or in some way assisted in her suicide. So people start to say, like, we can't show, please don't show the art of Vivienne, kind of asking the institution of the museum to extract her work from it. And so that's kind of where we're introduced to her, via like the public's reaction to her work, which is disturbing, but also this rumor that may or may not be true.
It's interesting because you use the term rumor. I mean, I'm totally obsessed with Mladen Dollar's theory of rumors that he articulates in his new book, Rumors with Polity. Theory Redux is really, really
Well,
good.
the theory, I don't know it.
So basically, it's to do with how the structure of rumor is materially driven, affected, shaped by the structure of the media that exists today. So basically, forms of chatter, um, opinions, taste formation, bitching behind people's backs has been part of societal formation forever, and there's ways in which we also often share and create cultures around rejection of certain icons. You see this in, like, let's say Great Britain, right, with the royal family, that I think a lot of people who aren't from Britain don't understand the role, the love hate, but also the role of social cohesion, where you can kind of basically through a mutual disgust and a mutual acknowledgement of how ridiculous it is, sort of there's a sort of formation of the group where you sort of share a jouissance related to that. But basically, with social media, there is something about, and this also relates, by the way, to the way in which we live in this epoch of the extreme fall in the global rate of profit because of basically unvalued and unrecognized labor. But basically, social media confronts us with rumor in a way
Mm,
that is official, uh, apparently legitimate, and in some ways irrefutable because it exists. So if we think about, like, the aesthetics of print, like the revolution of the um, printing press is that this huge transformation in society, in the spread of Enlightenment ideas, and in the idea of like what religion is, all this kind of stuff. But we have this whole history of the aesthetic of print,
mhm,
black typeface against white, that I really think has this like extreme um value instigation where it seems
mhm,
official, even if it's just some rando behind a pseudonym on Reddit. If it's there and it's published on a platform that seems legitimate, even though the people who are generating the value for the platform and turning it into a legitimate thing are just randos on the internet, it seems and it has a massive effect on the subject who is interfacing with the rumor about themselves. So there's
mm,
something really traumatic about basically being confronted with the rumor about yourself that is intolerable in a way that experiencing it or not experiencing it, or it being behind your back, or in a community of 100 people in a village versus the billions of people, online or whatever. But it's also, I think it works similarly with one of the ways in which the commons. So obviously the commons is commoditized. This leads to a, let's say, degeneration of the political possibility of recognition through misrecognition in terms of human interaction. Because basically, like, like the way psychoanalysis works, or any kind of recognition slash misrecognition works, is through the gradual traumatic approachment of the realization that the other person with whom you're interfacing is a divided subject like you, knows
Mhm.
nothing more than you, but it is only through their division as a subject that they are a speaking subject, that they're a discerning subject, and therefore that they can feed back some kind of image related to yourself
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
is of value and means something. So, in order to get recognition, we must be misrecognized or have the possibility that this person has come to this discernment and they could have thought in a completely different way.
Right.
But in terms of, as soon as you have the commodity logic of the subject, the commodity offers a faux transcendent oneness and alterity, so a solution to lack in desire that presents itself as magically whole against the contingent lack that can be filled up by the commodity. So as soon as it becomes an interpersonal or subject being commoditized or identity or whatever, this whole aspect of subjectivity that is foundational to speech, thought, self-consciousness, and blah, 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 emancipation is rendered, not, it's just, it's turned into, so people appear wholer and more complete than they actually are. And this is really bad for like society and for the way that we elevate and debase other people. We start embracing like Orientalist and racist logics. It's like something that is really interesting, the way that misogyny works in terms of psychoanalysis. We were reading the Little Hands case recently, and something that is so interesting in terms of Little Hans's anxiety is relative to the deadness aliveness of his mother. So basically, Little Hans is like, notices that there are phalluses around
Mhm.
and that inanimate objects don't have a phallus, but animate objects do. But it's not all animate objects because his mother doesn't.
Mhm.
So he associates aliveness and deadness with the difference between the phallus and not having the phallus.
Okay.
But how does he square the fact that his mum is alive, but she is castrated visually?
Mhm.
So she is both dead and alive,
Mhm.
which is terrifying. And this is what we are, both dead and alive. We
Yeah.
are alive insofar as we're dead. We are dead before we are alive. We give up an aspect of what we imagine to be a full aliveness through our subjectivity in order to participate in the spoken life of the subject. And this is something that is like ultimately points to like a death of God theology. We are born of less than nothing when you sort of integrate this insight. And obviously, like, this lack has been managed in all sorts of different ways throughout society in different ways. But one way is in a reactionary commodity logic, which represses the strangeness of the dead and aliveness in a very specific way, and places the blame for not succeeding in transcending one's condition on oneself through logics of like meritocracy, or that you can just buy your way out of it or whatever. And different formations have their own sort of like reactionary ways through God in the sky, etc., etc., etc. But basically, commodity logic denies all of this dead and aliveness in the subject. And one of the ways, social media, aside from the officialdom of statements made about people and individuals, and obviously it's soothing to imagine that um, an official statement can be made on X or Y person. They are rendered like less threatening as a divided subject when they are just like this totemic thing. this scapegoatable being behind whom we can imagine there is a utopian world of perfection cast in this person's shadow, if only they existed in a different way, or they didn't exist at all. But on social media, like just like the screen, just like the white black text against white carries this officialdom, there's the history of the star system, like the image projection on screen really captures our imagination in a way that people seem whole and more complete than they actually are. But this sort of relates to what you were saying earlier, just before we press record, about reviews, because I sort of feel like in this world where everything is commoditized, where the rate of profit is so low, where there are so few roles, it's impossible to get a read via a commoditized platform of whether a text or a work of art is actually objectively good art or not, because
Hmm.
it's so tied into a reactionary capitalist oppositional logic of Puritanism, attempting to purify lack, which is ontological, via cultural suppositions. And you no longer get, or it is basically impossible, where basically a reviewer must first of all show that they are worthy of their job and role as a reviewer. Please don't
Yeah.
cancel me. And so the review becomes a performance of that position relative to the work rather than actually just a read on the work.
Hmm.
And you were saying that this happened recently in terms of, yeah.
Yeah, we were talking about, right, like we were talking about a lot before we hit record, but I think we were talking about the like that this impulse to kind of, I guess out of fear or whatever, say I am on this side of things. I believe this, and then kind of get to the whatever the point might be. But yeah, I was talking about a particular review of Vivienne where the person felt the need. It was very interesting, like felt the need in the very beginning of the review to kind of like reference a piece I had written for a particular magazine like 2 or maybe 3 years ago and say that they didn't like, approve of the magazine, nor did they like the piece. However, they liked the book. And then they went on to kind of like talk about what they liked about the book. But there was this initial like, and that to me, like, it's really I mean, it's sort of funny because I'm not sure what the point of that beginning part was, but I think it had something to do with, or my read on it was that it had something to do with like, the climate we're in where people tend to like jump to conclusions. It's actually quite brave in a way and difficult to just let people wonder what you fucking think, or to not say this is what I'm for, this is what I'm against. I'm writing about this person and I'm writing about their work. I'm not gonna like take a stance on some like half controversy that existed, whatever, on the internet in a blip a few years ago. But they want to like kind of cover their ass. But I think this is also a fallacy, and I guess maybe, yeah, it sort of denies this split that you're talking about, because that's not what it is to like be a human or to read another person. Like just because you have a certain thing in your bio or you say something at the top of a review that doesn't tell me much. A kind of like complex read of a novel or something, some sort of writing that contains, intrigue and ambiguity or whatever would tell us more about that person. Um, and their read on the world, and therefore like our read on them, as opposed to just like this blanket statement. I think that's why it's like I don't really trust these sort of stances that people take online, or like whatever flags we might put on our foreheads or houses or whatever. It's sort of, what does it mean about the person? You actually have to get to know them.
Well, this is the thing. It's like the last person who knows anything about themselves is themselves. There's a reason
Right.
why you
This
actually
is
have
the
to,
thing, right? This
it's
is like,
like, yeah.
it's like what's going to happen to psychoanalysis, because now it's like you're not allowed to question, if we are not allowed to question or have like a dialogue about the way we see ourselves, or what we feel is our identity, or what we, that shuts the whole process down.
Absolutely. And this is not to say it's funny because one of the ways in which so cleverly we're embracing this like emergency commodity logic is this sense of urgency. You know, there's a special what's the glorious time, there's a special place in hell, you know, this urgency of issues that, but of course it's like I don't know, I'm like a total aviation nerd, right? One of the most canonical plane crashes of all time, um, Air France.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it's batshit.
Yeah.
Maybe I can like in
We
the
both have stuff with flying.
yeah, no, I mean, so much to say about flying. But basically, in this plane crash, the pilots forget how to fly their plane. Well, one of them does. One of the first officers completely forgets. And basically, a series of things happen. I won't spoil it. It's very intriguing if people want to watch a documentary on it, you know. But basically, the main principle that is forgotten of physics is if you're in a stall pattern, you have to lower the nose of the plane to gain speed. So you have to actually, if you're falling from the sky, you actually have to go down to go up. You know, so it's like the universe is born out of Big Bang, where everything collapsed into the smallest possible energy, and this then, no, smallest possible space, and then this explodes the energy outwards. You know, this
Mm.
dialectic and everything. So it's like often in order to resolve, and I think, you know, one of the things in terms of oppositional logic is we absolutely have an economic situation which is horrendous, absolutely horrendous, and needs to be resolved. You ask anybody from any community that there is generally an aspiration to make people's lives better. You know, you talk to the most, I don't know, conservative Christian, and their vision of heaven seems quite socialistic, for example. But you know, there are different opinions on how to get there or what have you. So I think often thinking about, you know, obviously humans are unquestionably revolve around death drive, and this is something that we have to kind of take into consideration. This way in which we attempt to manage lack through excess, which is the most creative force in the universe and can be positive and can be negative. But these are things that need to be sort of looked at and borne into consideration. But and obviously, you know, for instance, there are all sorts of things that need to be dealt with. There are all sorts of bad people, bad actors, bad situations that need to be dealt with. But there are also ways in which conviction around what is good and bad can arrest solutions by oppositionalizing. So turning to a reactionary utopic logic where, because of death drive itself, the problem has to be sustained because confronting the lack in the problem is too traumatic, because often it is as bad or worse than we want to admit it actually is. Like it is actually one of the most traumatic things. You know, people often revolve around um, the same thing over and over again, precisely because they can't, in a sort of Winnicottian sense, like alphabetize, they can't digest. So it might sound like somebody is going on about something because it's all that, you know, it's their foundational logic, or, you know, they've decided the world revolves around this. It's actually sort of the opposite. It's like they haven't actually been able to
Mm.
accept the foundational truth of it, and they have to keep processing it and reality testing it and what have you. And, you know, what is repressed often in psychoanalysis, or what is traumatic, is something that is has a level of like effectual ambiguity to it. So you can't tolerate the dissonance between loving the person that has treated you in this way, or um, getting some level of enjoyment out of something that, you know, is also manifestly horrendous. And
Mhm.
that dissonance is something that's really difficult to digest. So, but we can sustain the problem by utopically denying the ambiguity at all, or the lack
Mhm.
in it at
Mhm.
all. And the toxicity just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, because then behind this toxicity, we can imagine a perfect world where this didn't exist, but this is like the logic of the foot shooter or whatever. Um, But interestingly, like literature or the best art, what defines it, what makes it art is its ambiguity, is
Yeah.
its tarrying with, its um each form of art is a concretization of form that an artist employs to negotiate the contradictions of reality in a certain way. And each art form expresses or has the capacity or can be developed in certain ways to deal with that contradiction. So this form of reviewing, which obviously is very safe, but is it also dangerous because do we not need art to be able to confront, digest these aspects of reality that can't so easily be expressed?
Hmm.
But you know, something very, very similar happened when you said this. It was just like it's just quite funny because I had this show that I was part of making, and when we had a premiere, we had this it was 4-part miniseries. We had the first two shown, and you kind of have to watch the whole thing to get the full arc of the argumentation. But basically, a lot of what is being said is this couple in America are happened to be like the contingent gristle of the real in American culture. So for all political positions, they ended up embodying through the contingent reality of the historical moment everything that was wrong with the world for various different groups. And this narrative is false, as all narratives that paper over, like basically the traumatic condition that people are living under in America. And America is a very oppositional country precisely because of its sort of capitalist origins. And so it really questions this narrative. But of course, for a certain media position, these guys are just baddies, and how could anybody excuse whatever? But we get to that eventually in the show. But basically, this review, I actually had to contact the writer because there were five. So the show is about a woman who is married to a man who, for certain perspectives, embodies like everything that is wrong with America and the world. So it's not even about him, firstly. But secondly, five libelous statements in half a sentence about this
Mm.
man. I kid you not. Five things that were like not related to the truth, but you could sort of imagine if somebody kind of thought that this guy was the world's most biggest evil, like the read on a situation. And unfortunately, there were aspects of this case that this guy was involved in that we even now couldn't get into.
Mm.
And if we had been able to get into, it absolutely explodes the whole thing. And it really is basically a question of homophobia, but that's a whole other thing. I won't get into it. But basically, which I think somebody from this media position would be on the side of, let's just say. But I had to, yeah, so he took out the five libelous state. I mean, these are complete made up lies,
Mm.
five of them in half a sentence. And it was very much like, I have to show, and I feel for this person because obviously we're all in this precarious position relative to capital. We all feel ourselves sinking under the pressures of economics. There are fewer and fewer roles to go around. There are fewer and fewer paid roles to go around, which I think is the real issue
Yeah. Yeah.
that we're not able to tarry with because it's too painful to kind of acknowledge.
Oh, I think that's what you were going to write about with Vivienne.
Is that what it was?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have to show that, please, sir, let me keep my job,
Yeah. Yeah.
which it could be in any situation. Let's say it's in a right-wing conservative evangelical church that was facing similar economic situations, possibly not because it functions in a different way, but that appeal that we'd have to perform. Well, in fact, no, I actually take that back because this incident is a prime example of how you had to live by certain adherences to certain things, otherwise you would be cancelled in your own way. Um, but yeah, no, it makes reviewing impossible.
Mm.
It makes the articulation, and it also makes, if it makes reviewing impossible, does it make a certain form of art impossible?
Right. I was going to ask that. I think that's something in a way that I'm asking in Vivienne in some way or another, and also in this new book. I mean, and I'm also just wondering it a lot IRL, like, because I do think art, obviously, and the reading of art or the engaging with art and the way that we like engage with other people and ourselves, it's all kind of tied together.
Yeah.
And especially when we're talking about doing it in the what did you call it? Like privatized public arena, where there is a kind of like always there are all these eyes on us. That's why I think in a way I like there's something really, really honest and derangedly honest about certain like corners of YouTube or whatever, where people aren't necessarily, it's not really about like the repost or the getting social capital or appearing right. I mean, these people are just they're like engaging with something they love or something that irks them or whatever, and they're talking to other people, and it can feel really like actual relation, which I think is what happens when you're engaging with a work of art that doesn't necessarily tell you what to think, but that you have to fucking think about. Not like it doesn't have to be difficult per se or like avant whatever, but this I think that's the truly like interesting work of art does like asks us to do that in some way and doesn't tell us what the appropriate stance is. Which I hope Vivienne does not. And it's been interesting because I've heard a lot of different things from people about what they thought of the ending or who they thought like the villain was or who they hated or whatever. Which has been cool and weird. And people got very angry. A lot of people got very angry at the ending. Like some of the one time a couple times, if I'm being honest, I went on the like Goodreads.
Goodreads is the meanest place on the
These people are
internet.
serious.
It's
Yeah,
so mean.
I've never
So
reviewed
mean.
anything on Goodreads, but I was like, wow, it's
No, it's
fucking
harsh. It's
it's
harsh.
fucking mean. And
Yeah.
some of them are really great. Like some of them
Yeah.
are not mean at all, but some of them I was like, wow. So I kind of respect. I don't know. I like that
But it is,
more
it's
than
funny how
like
these different platforms encourage different, like, because you do see on Goodreads, like if Amazon generally has really nice reviews, especially for
yeah,
literature, and I
thoughtful.
wonder why that is. Maybe it's because you have to verify yourself. I don't know. And by the way,
Maybe.
this does tie into questions of internet and the commons, the early internet, the internet of today. Obviously there's been this push, I think, from sort of right thinking safetyistic perspectives, and maybe there's some value to it. I don't know, I haven't thought about it enough, but in terms of having to prove your identity on the internet, but
Mhm.
this proving identity on the internet comes with a sort of commodity form that pure anonymity doesn't.
Yes.
You
Yes.
can't really commoditize anonymity. Where does the value go? So it is true that into the comment section. And it's funny because I don't know whether I don't know how to group it, but the kinds of people who find it funny to go online and sort of engage in some things, I find it too traumatic. I'm like such people pleaser that even an anonymous people pleaser, I'd be like, oh my God, this person says something. But some people's comments on the internet, Reddit can be absolutely hilarious.
That is amazing. Yeah, there's some
Yeah.
great threads. Anonymous people pleaser is a good handle.
Anonymous people
Um,
pleaser. Yeah, it's like I will
but
kill
on it, but
you.
to the point about anonymity, isn't that kind of like what we're talking? I feel like that's like the thing that we're trying to get there, like to like getting to the anonymous part of ourselves or to the work of art, like that thing, you
Well,
know?
it's exactly anonymous means unnamed, right? There's
Yeah.
always an aspect. And this is the thing. It's like when we're invited to claim a territory, to brand ourselves. Who the fuck knows? I mean, I don't even know myself. I really, really, at the age I am, have no idea. Do you know one of the worst memories of high school was when, um, with my best friend at the time, we decided to tell each other what uh, other people were bitching about us about. I don't know if that's
Uh-huh.
a preposition, but it only got to me. We didn't get to her because I was so traumatized. I was like, what? Like I think there was something about some clothing item I wore or something that like had offended or irked or people
Mhm.
took the piss out of or something. And I ended up hiding in a cupboard, like
Covered.
crying. So I was like, it's so traumatic because and the trauma is not necessarily that, I don't think anything was like I'd done something terrible or people, but it was like the absurdity of it.
Yeah.
You can be as, I'm one of these people, like I think loads of people are, where you think you do the stupid magical thinking thing of like, as long as I've been anxious about it, I've sort of protected myself from this happening in reality. As long as I'm worried,
Mhm.
then I've girded my loins or whatever. But you
Right.
cannot ever, predict. So, the owl of Minerva flies at dusk. It's just like chaos, and you do not know. Obviously, we can be sort of thinking people and learn from patterns of history or whatever, but something crazy will always happen to the double six will be rolled. And it is the most confronting and traumatic thing is it's just you cannot get ahead of this stuff. You just can't. Um,
I want to know what was the outfit?
it was actually this, like pink polo shirt. I did really like it and I wore it all the time.
It seems to track, yeah.
Yeah, anyway. I mean, I think wear the same thing, blah de blah, but it was really, really traumatizing. And it
Well,
wasn't
outfits
like,
are, I think, I mean, outfits are everywhere in Vivienne, obviously, and
yeah,
there's a lot of
yeah, yeah,
comments
there's a
about outfits.
designers.
I
Yeah.
wonder about this too, like what we wear or what our personalities are in the age of like, naming and having to, sort of say all the things about ourselves at the top of a review or whatever, like how it affects not only art, but just like how we dress or how we are, and are we getting our personalities like deflating in some way.
Well, because there was one thing I really wanted to come onto, so I'm just going to put like a little finger in the air to say that I want to talk about the sort of
Mhm.
like ancient Greek vibe of the novel. But
Okay.
just to say about the aesthetic dress, there is something obviously very tribal about dress, but also abstractive. So for Hegel, we want to go turn abstraction is not necessarily the good form of logic. Thought we want to sort of articulate in a concrete way the nature of the dialectic or whatever. So
And
abstract,
Vivian very obnoxiously starts with the Hegel quote.
I love it. So abstraction basically is this idea that you can replicate the signifier A in another context, which is a logical fallacy because A does not represent A. There's a division in the signifier A. So as soon as we attempt to signify something, especially, okay, we are self-conscious beings, we are subjects of language and are alienated as such. We can experience our own sentiment and articulate them, but in order to articulate it, we are standing beside ourselves or outside ourselves. So we can never replicate the signifier A, and the signifier A cannot be replicated in another context. So this is the logic of psychoanalysis. It's metonymy, which is the chain of signifiers. So like a slippery bar of soap, the word keeps going and it relates to
Mhm.
signifiers, or like, a sort of chemistry reaction with like a divided atom that has a hole in it and it latches onto something else. And so this is why this is the radical political aspect of language in psychoanalysis and subjectivity, is it's like it can go on forever and it can be infinite for anybody, and it cannot be closed and it cannot be commoditized in that sense. But it's also
Yeah.
why psychoanalysis takes years, and you can't just do a dream dictionary because like a penis could mean a snake could mean a penis for somebody, or it could mean something else for somebody else. I had such a traumatic dream last night. I had one of those dreams where I wake up this morning and was like, thank fuck. It was just a
I
dream.
had a really bad one
Anyway,
too.
but basically, um, but clothing and physiognomy is like a way that there is a lot of judgment.
Yeah.
And obviously, a lot of the sort of progressive in a sort of traditional sense of the idea of progressive is, don't judge a book by its cover, or, people have more to offer than what they, visually represent or whatever. But obviously the turn to identity politics is like a radical reactionary shift in this, whereas, it's all to do with signifiers,
Yeah.
abstractedly leading to other signifiers in a concrete way that we all received.
Yes. Well, it shuts it down. It shuts
That's
down the,
exactly. So it's like this person is from a different tribe, therefore they think this, they think this, they think this. And I think it's interesting, like I've definitely experienced the logic of this relative to but everybody does because it just doesn't work. So everybody feels alienated and an
Mhm.
outsider relative to this because it's like,
Yeah.
well, I'm a person who has um just thinking about, outfits and stuff. I have like actually I feel like I can't. There's one anecdotal story I really want to say here, but I can't because it involves an institution I know breaking laws, but they think they're doing it in a progressive way, but basically it's
Mhm.
really anyway. But it's to do with appearance and people having a certain color of hair, meaning that they can't be employed. I mean, actually, a witness this is absolutely fucking crazy. So, but you do in terms of the city I live in, there is lots of trends that like people wear, and often people consciously adopt certain looks tribally as a shorthand to pertain to, but in
Yes,
reality,
I am on this team.
yeah.
Right. Mhm.
And obviously there's lots of jokes that are made about this, like the bleached eyebrows, short fringes, or you see like when what the Trump supporting female wears, the Fox News lady or whatever, you know. But this is obviously like a slippery slope or whatever. There's
Yeah.
somebody who like maybe has more of the aesthetic of one side, but I don't identify with that side.
The
Anyway,
pink cardigan.
yeah, the pink cardigan. But anyway, I don't know where I was going with this,
But
but
there's also so much room for obviously like in language like mistranslation. People aren't always going to be picking up what you're putting down. There can be moments of connection, but what are you really, what's being communicated is anyone's guess. And I think like actually just this morning, right before we got on this call, I went to the health food store, my right-wing eating habits. Now we were talking also
it
before
used
we
to
were
be very left wing. It used
yeah.
health food store used to be
Yes.
90s
Now
left.
it's like if you eat healthfully, you're right wing, or if you drink raw milk, you're right wing. So I went to the grocery store. It's raining. I'm still wearing my raincoat. It's very long, and that's what I love about it. It's like to the ankle. Perfect raincoat, in my opinion. And the lady who was at the checkout was like, I love your raincoat. I love the length of it. And I was like, that's exactly right. That's
Right.
exactly why it's great. You're right, But that's like so it feels so good, but that's not always what happens. But I
But the
think
thing
there's
is, though, it only feels good because it could go the other way.
right, correct. Yeah.
You look great. Do you know what I recently? So
Or like, look at this frumpy bitch with her long raincoat.
no, my sister keeps saying so. I think she's sort of enjoying. I don't know. Anyway, I've called her out on this a few times because I did find it kind of upsetting. But basically, I'm like close to giving birth, and something that always comes out is if I'm wearing a jumper, I look fat because the jumper. I've got like quite a big bum. But if you wear a jumper, it just
Yeah.
looks, you know. And so she'll say things like, "It's so funny because when you wear that." You actually just look pregnant. But when you're wearing that jumper, you just look like
Yeah.
that. Uh, anyway, not that I should care about. Anyway, but how did I get on? But the thing is, the fact is, the judgment only has a positive impact insofar as it could have been a negative,
Yeah.
because the person has come to the conclusion
On their own.
on their own, on a balance of whatever, and has fed back to you that you look good in their opinion. But then sometimes it's like, you get a compliment from somebody that you're like, no, I don't love you. But I was to go back to no, but it is I really am not an expert on fashion, and it is interesting fashion as an art form, fashion as a means of expression, fashion as um how tastes are formed and made, what taste is, how taste relates to material conditions, how we think we choose our own taste, but it's actually formulated by wider circumstances. I was actually talking, my sister was going, same sister who's saying the mean stuff about the jumper, was, and also like that what is mean changes in a period of time where being too skinny is not good. Maybe it's a
Mhm.
compliment. I don't know. Maybe I don't know who, well, whatever. Anyway, so she's going out on a date and she was saying about how she was like, am I wearing too much makeup? And I said, I didn't think so. And that she looked good. But it is true that we're in a little epoch now where makeup is less um, desire of a desirable or fashionable look. and one gets used to it. She said she feels like when she wears makeup, she looks anyway, I won't anyway. She looks like, let's say, like a man wearing makeup, basically.
Mhm.
But it's because, and I was just saying, well, the funny thing is in 2016, we were all caked as followers of trends, caked in makeup relative to now. And it is true that I sometimes feel I like wearing makeup, but it feels strange to wear makeup in a period of time where it's socially acceptable, and not only socially acceptable, almost desirable not to look, not to, you look at Pamela Anderson, or even Meghan
Right.
Markle appeared on a podcast without makeup on the other day. And things like the penciled eyebrows in the 90s
Mhm.
looked good. Somehow we
Yeah,
thought it
now
looked
everyone wants them like real thick. Yeah.
good. Yeah, or I don't know, but the brows were massive about 10 years ago in the UK. I don't know if they are still massive in America,
They're
but
massive, yeah.
massive, yeah. They frame the
Or they're bleached or
well, they're
shaved,
bleached. Yeah,
the
yeah,
other.
exactly. The bleached eyebrow is interesting. But also, you're right in terms of like the signifier constantly shifts, and there is also, let's say, a right coded version of the hipster short fringe mullet bleach
Mhm.
eyebrows look because of the rise of a right-wing hipster pose in certain quarters of New York. I don't know. So you can get ahead of it and try to stake your flag in a certain and
Mhm.
appearing a certain way, but it's going to be appropriated and it's going to evolve, and
Well, I think maybe this is like a controversial. Well, I've been thinking about this with the flag, like the newest pride flags. They're like with the circle. Can you picture it? It's like
yeah.
all
What does
the.
the circle mean? Is that an
I
indigenous?
I believe the circle means intersex,
Right.
or
Okay.
maybe asexual. Something is asexual also.
Right.
There's an
Right.
asexual color on there.
Isn't that
But
gray?
probably. I don't know what the asexual color is, but a lot of shit's on there and every like line means something else. And I've been thinking that like this kind of thinking has something to do with maybe what we're talking about, or like this idea of like okay, it's kind of the opposite of what Zizek says. Like you've quoted it before, the like the plus at the
Right.
end
Yeah. Yeah.
being like the most important because that's sort of where we all fall.
Yeah.
Um, and like
That
the rainbow,
sexuality is the plus.
yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah, right, the plus. And the rainbow flag, in a way, it's like the original pride flag is this sort of, it's that. It's sort
Yeah.
of like
Yeah. It sort of
a
encaptures.
rainbow,
Yeah.
everything. It's everything,
Everything. Yeah. Yeah.
everybody.
Yeah.
And the new one is it's very like literal and uh it's well, it's not aesthetically appealing. Sorry, but it's just not. But it's like this literal thinking of like this means this and this means this, and we have to add this part where it's like, well, it was all there actually
Yeah.
before. And now, so
Yeah.
I think there's something in that in terms of like the reading of people
But it is
or
interesting, the metaphorical logic versus the this literal logic.
Mhm, right,
Because it
right.
is true. And also if you think about protest culture and what it means and meant and continues to mean, um, in an evolving, commoditized, privatized public space, it cannot ever mean the same thing that it did 70 years ago. We are not in the same material terrain.
Hmm.
We need new critiques and analyses of that material terrain, which are often arrested by cultural rather than material critiques. Um, but there was something that you said that really made me think about something relative to commoditization, metaphor. Damn, the plus.
It'll
But
come.
but this is again, it's the abstractive logic, which is the idea that you can replicate A in another context. It's like the
Right.
context has changed, and something that so something that I think is often missing when you have a critique of, let's say, how, like, there's a critique of like PMC, performative politics, or whatever, or a critique of the ability of political thinkers to think materially and in terms of class and all this kind of stuff, which I absolutely do agree with. But something that I think is forgotten is the role of critical theory in the 20th century and how important its evolution has been and was and continues to be. But how the issue perhaps is not the critical theory, but the way in which we need to continue to develop this theory relative to our material conditions today. So we were at this talk the other day by a friend of my husband's about money in the 19th century novel, the role of money, the signification of literally the image of money itself. And something that really struck me was how possible it was to articulate money and value in a certain way in the 19th century. And I think this is a point that is made by some theorists, some Marxist theorists, and the fact that Marx was writing in the 19th century because this is something, and I think this is something that's forgotten, that this contradiction is so vivid. You know, all of a sudden you have the explosion of the Industrial Revolution, and bourgeois city dwellers in Britain are confronted with the workhouse conditions of the workers who are literally generating the value. We then in the 20th century, because of something that I really feel I always go on about, it is just not articulated enough, that is very key in Marx, especially volume 3, is the collapsing rate of profit and how profit is generated from surplus value. But basically, in collapsing rates of profit, you have things called countervailing tendencies. So ways in which the capitalist class like finds to extract value, given that automation means that less value can be extracted from labor generation of a product. One of them is monopolies, and this is something that Marx articulates, but I think another is value extraction in forms of labor that don't look like labor. And I think online interactions, purity politics, moralism, the commoditization of the self is a huge part of this. And another way is in the, I would say, the last 40 years, the collapse of the middle class via the bourgeoisification of everything and the extraction of value via a backing oneself in the lottery of the bourgeois marketplace. So getting into debt to go to university, the commoditization of degrees, all this kind of thing. Oh, pencil just she just like came and like, I feel in a really cute way. I'm just trying to think about what I was saying there. The rabbit ruined it. It was going to be a really good point. The rabbit ruined it. Yeah, so basically, but I think because value extraction became so much more about affect and cultural performativity, and less to do with just raw systems of exchange in a very clear, definable, monetizable way. Like a child goes down a mine, this generates this value.
Yeah, sure.
You have to look at desire and critique and analyze value generated by the mobilization of desire in the 20th century as a way to keep value generation going under the collapsing rate of profit. And that's why I think critical theory is so important. But there has been a forgetting that that critical theory is actually a very materialist critique. And it becomes this abstractive, performative, often when it's tied to, okay, so there's this emancipatory promise because it's a left-wing critique, because it's actually a Marxist critique of desire. Therefore, the revolution will come if we do this. But the revolution coming is like the ultimate, like communism becoming the dream of capitalism. It's like the ultimate way that we can like self-assuredly lean into and commoditize. This is the perfect solution. And it's in doing that that you then deny the radical critique. But in a sense, do we need more critical theory, not less, more critique of the critique, but tying it to the actual structure of our economy that is the same but always changing, the same in that it's, Pence's going mental. She's like really going mental, but the same in that it's about value extraction, but different in that it's constantly shifting in terms of its material manifestation. And I do think this is where art is so important because art is an articulation of how we deal with lack, which is also what the economy is doing, but in a way that's like before articulation is concretized. So it's like this anonymous, is it this unnameable aspect of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And if you can't do art, you can't. And I do think the thing is, it's like in terms of access to institutions, there is a certain thing of like, well, if the reviewer doesn't want to review it, just make homemade art at home and put it on YouTube or whatever. But then how do we access groups of people? How do we um having, does the log fall in the forest if no one hears it? Does the art exist if it does not come alive through the interpretative reading of the subject who is participating in the creation of the art by witnessing it or by reading it or whatever?
Right. Right. There has to be a relational element, I think.
Absolutely.
An erotic element, like that kind
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
exchange of energy. And that's like yeah, I mean, wait, what I have to go kind of soon. So wait, I want to know more about the ancient
But yeah,
Greek
so the
thing.
ancient Greek thing, what I was going to say is this does have the text really has this kind of ancient Greek vibe, partly in terms of its ending, its tragic ending, right? And it's the ending that is to do with something beyond the scope of the characters. It's to do with like contingency. It's to do with, there is a sort of like moral critique going on. There is a sort of like series of events that happen that shouldn't happen or whatever, but it's also how a singular subject, and these characters are also like Vivienne is almost um an iconically written character. Like she's
Mhm.
also sort of like an empty character, like
Yeah.
the character who is this anonymous woman revived for the purpose of a show, whatever. um but there is this question of like all these goings on that are sort of brewing throughout the story out of the hands of Vivienne and that occur by the end of the novel. So it
Yeah.
has this sort of like in the hands of the gods kind of vibe, this
Hmm.
tragic vibe, but also the way in which the inter I don't know that like there's like a chorus, right? The online voices are like the chorus.
Yeah.
And it's a long time since I've read any like ancient Greek literature, but like the chorus is almost sort of like the voice that is summarizing and feeding back and also sort of like pointing with a kind of wry, winky thing, like we're going this way,
Yeah.
pick up this. But also in this text, it's like these are randos on the internet. But there's also this question of like, is this internet voice the guiding hand?
Hmm.
Is it just a commentary? Like what comes first, the story or the commenters?
Yeah, I love that. No one's brought that up really, but I that was sort of what I was wondering too. And I think well, there's something I felt, I really felt for all the commenters, like they felt really singular to me. And some of them like even kind of start to form relationships with each other in the comment section. So I do think it is a kind of, and I wanted it also importantly to be like, I didn't want it to feel like you were just on the internet as it exists. Like I wanted it to feel a bit transportive and uncanny, like it's the internet, but kind of like a couple inches to the
Yeah.
side of it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of alternate, surreal internet. Because to me, I'm not really sure what that would do to just kind of recreate um the shit we're inundated with constantly in the same way. So yeah, and I also wanted it to kind of like I'm like flipping through it right now. I wanted it to highlight this two worlds thing that we're constantly doing, like even as I'm doing it now, like the physical Vivienne, I'm like flipping through and then like talking to you on Zoom or whatever, like engage with that in a formal way that's somewhat discombobulating. So yeah, I think the chorus of internet commenters becomes maybe like the voice of it's like both deranging and like a guide, like a weird, yeah, guide or reason in a way.
Yeah, it has this kind of like stellar, like constellation-y kind of quality. Like, is it predictive? Like the algorithm is predictive? Does internet logic like fulfill itself in its
Right.
arbitrary, the way that so, like the wing of a butterfly.
Yeah. No, I was thinking of this like, is it that the internet is it this like algorithmic experience, or is it that because there are synchronicities, certain things happen in real life in the Vivienne world or household that are then kind of echoed in some way online? Or is it like prophecy, or do these women
Yeah,
have are imbued with some kind of magical force? And yeah, you're right. Like Vivienne is this iconic character, so she's meant to be like unnameable in a way, and empty full, I guess. And speaking of reviewers, someone actually had like I forget how they put it, but essentially that I was like the men were like rich and full, and like the women were not. I'm like a misogynist basically, but that was like the
I
whole
watched
point,
it.
essentially, Vivienne
Yeah.
being this singular
But
icon that
it's
all
a
of these stories exist within.
But there is this is ought question where I sometimes think that a certain political ideology, especially when it's, well, a political ideology, when it's attempting to soothe and solve, that the is ought goes out of the window, everything becomes ought. So if you articulate it, you have to
Mhm.
articulate what you wish was the case. So
Right.
you're it can be a really feminist critique to show the hollowness of the iconized
Yeah.
female.
Yeah.
Um, and it can be the misogynistic take to do the reverse, to put it upon the woman to be the, humanized subject, whatever. But I had a similar thing. I made a film, and it stars a very good friend of mine who happens to be a very attractive French actress, and it's an 8-minute bedroom scene, and I co-wrote the film with my partner at the time, and a lady had seen it via his platform and assumed that he had directed it. So firstly, it's like,
Okay, we talked about
that's
this.
a little bit of an assumption, my love. Anyway, but basically, so the other thing that I find funny about film, because film is so much a material like medium, it's to do with how much money you have, how much time, how the
Sure.
crew's feeling, how you're feeling, And basically, in this scene, the dress that we ended up putting the woman in was just a single slip, red slip. And the guy happened to be wearing a sort of more gothy type outfit with lots of necklaces and like shirt and all this kind of stuff. And basically, in the way that it happened, he just like takes off her dress in one go because also she has, he's telling her a story. So she has actually more action to do in terms of
Mhm.
like who is dominating the scene because he's recounting the story. So this is actually like very like just basically ABC practical kind of thing, the way we set it up. And basically this woman like went on this massive rant about how misogynistic this male was for having this woman be in her bra and knickers for like the duration of the scene. And it's like, well, firstly, I know my friend really well. She loves getting naked. She's 50 years old. She was just on the cover of French Playboy, which she produced herself. She fucking loves it, firstly. And that's also a totally legitimate form of desiring and being, and a
Mhm.
woman can embody that if they want to. But also, thanks for assuming that it was a man.
Well, like it seems she wanted to get pissed about something. She wanted to kind of it's like the lame like recess energy of like tattletaling. It's like people are really excited to be lame.
But it's, yeah,
It's
also this
not cool.
desire for the world to reflect. And maybe that, there are lots of media and art forms that portray a singular version of female desire. That doesn't mean that that has to be the way it is,
Yeah,
you know.
right.
But there was one other thing about the online commentary I kind of wanted to ask you about, which was, did you take real comments, or are these all your imagination? Because it's
Good
very
question.
funny and well done. And I have to say,
I'm
sometimes
glad you
you
liked it.
stuff on the line where you're just like,
Did
that's
you
so.
laugh?
I did laugh, yeah, of course. Yeah.
That's good. That's good. Um, it mostly it's well, it's a combination. I never really took verbatim any comments, but tried to almost like translate the energy of certain ones that I would find. Like some of them were almost like some of the religious ones or the long monologues where people were getting a little bit like upset. Like sometimes I would find this like energy in a YouTube comment and kind of like like try to channel it in a weird way into the book. But I wrote all of them myself, except one of them I did take verbatim. It's a YouTube comment that someone wrote about me. Um, what did she say? I think it was a woman. Um, Something like Emily is a high level troll or something like that. And I had someone say that about Vivienne.
Okay. Yeah, yeah.
So that was the
Is
only
that a compliment?
verbatim. Yeah, I take it as a compliment.
We've
I'm
got
not a low level troll.
not like high level, exactly. You've got to take what you can get these days. But there was one other thing I was going to say, which is something that is very interesting, is on Reddit. There is a ChatGPT subreddit that I sometimes go on that's quite funny, that is people recounting their relationships with their LLM. And lots of people are losing their mind, having psychotic breaks,
Yeah.
because the logic of the algorithm is very psychotic. It's very abstractive, as in it replicates. It just replicates. It cannot, because it can't think, it can't do abstraction, and it can't actually generate novelty. So it is affirmative. It just reaffirms what you tell it.
Yeah.
And
Which
if,
is what we want now from the world. We just
which
want
we
to be
want
aware.
now from the world, which is a very psychotic, because in terms of the way that the psychotic might manage lack, one of the ways in which it's articulated is to project the lack into a hole in the universe that needs to be fixed rather than within
Yeah.
oneself. Um, so, and this is why, one of the canonical sort of icons that come up for a lot of people who have psychotic breaks is identifying with Christ, Joan of Arc. So
Yeah.
there is something about like a sort of very activist streak, which is can sometimes that like Joan of Arc is this brilliant figure of history who gets a lot done because she sort of
Mhm.
applies the subjective, immanent, transcendent aspect of reality to a phenomenon that's external. So all of this libidinal energy goes there, and lots can be achieved when that's done. So, but basically, people, if you potentially have that structure and you're just constantly affirmed. So one of my psychoanalyst friends, obviously there's different schools of thought, but this is a sort of British psychoanalyst who buys some sort of Winnicott Beyond, and he says that when he treats psychosis, he will speak to the rational part of the subject and let the sort of psychotic aspect wither on the vine. Whereas, of course,
How do you do that?
you basically just engage. Well, I don't know. I don't know how he does it, but I think that you engage in the logical aspect because, it's not like
Mm-hmm.
somebody's still able to participate in reality, and
Got
there
it.
are healthy aspects, and you sort of speak to that and you sort of challenge and question in a certain way. And obviously questioning is a sort of antithetical to psychotic kind of.
Yes.
But the
Good.
LLM just affirms. And so there was this one
Yeah.
it was actually kind of amazing. Maybe I'll put it in the chat. I actually have it here, but it's like see if I can just read the headline of it. Um, my husband, ChatGPT is responsible for my husband's mental breakdown. My husband has been involuntarily admitted to the crisis psychiatric ward. I blame ChatGPT. Da, 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 da. I would
Wow.
He started talking to his bot 6 months ago. In the beginning, it was fun. He works in IT and he was discovering new ways to implement ChatGPT in customer service, blah, blah, blah. But recently he became irrational. He talks about walking the path of the Messiah, how he created the world's first self-aware AI. It has helped him become superhuman. You know, this sort of,
Yeah, that's
it can really,
frightening.
you and your relationship with your little AI, it just tells you what you want to hear. This can be very dangerous.
Well, which is, I mean, which of course, like the algorithm is one example, and also just kind of the emotional, I don't know, like emotionally blackmailing your way through life of like, you must reflect back to me exactly what I
It's
ask you
absolutely.
to.
So, in a sense, maybe we can conclude this conversation by saying the novel as art form is the antithesis of ChatGPT.
That's really interesting. Do you think like the novel as an art form or like some novels? Is it like hashtag not all
I
novels?
think the novel, not a novel, the novel as, let's say, an idealized uh, emblem of what a novel can be.
Because you're encountering
Countering.
yeah, something other. You're not turning to art to be affirmed, which is why trigger warnings are, I guess, to use your right, like reactionary in a sense.
Yeah. I mean, and it's, you know, trigger warning as just a helpful thing can, but as a sort of universalized, faux universal attempt to
Hmm.
mitigate against the trauma of confronting a different way of seeing, a different way of being. That
You never trigger warn your way out of an encounter when you're entering a novel or entering a
no.
movie or whatever. There,
And
no matter how many there are.
and again, it's this, I do think that basically the economic issues are so bad and have been repressed that the is ought has become a has really messed up our capacity to think and to
Yeah,
interact with art
we
because
are traumatized.
we don't want reality to be the way it is.
Vivienne
Amazing, amazing. And yeah, so we want the world to be so different. And it's legitimate to want that. You know, it's not easy for people, especially in certain circumstances at the moment. You know, it's not easy. So
Yeah,
I can kind of understand it, but we need to be confronted with the we cannot engage with reality without understanding how reality is formulated, which is so, it's funny because people have talked about, we're in this period of time we can't do think we philosophy should be banned,
I've not
It's
heard this.
so
Why
bad.
should it be banned?
Good question. But basically, I think it's just a sort of a hyperbolous way of saying it's so shit, do something. But
Uh,
the more, it's you don't just throw the baby out with bathwater. I see this often. I've had this illness for a long while, and what often happens when people are ill and undiagnosed is they turn to magical thinking and alternative stuff that can be very dangerous. And so, the failure, but this is the enemy of the enemy logic, the failure of, let's say, the science or whatever to respond leads us to turn to the opposition of that, which is also a problematic thing. And we need more thinking, not less. We need more knowledge. We need more
right, of course, we need more
relation
thinking
reality.
that less. It's more important than ever.
Exactly. And this is what I think about the critical theory. It's not like we need less commoditized, abstracted, um, hollow versions of theory that are comforting. We need more thought that actually gets us to how reality plays out. And we have very good guides from the past, like, we have Marx who writes really clearly, and the same patterns of the structure of our economy exist. It's mystified and it needs to be discussed and talked about. And we need more discussion, but we need more novels, we need more reading, we need
More
more
good
encounters,
novels.
more
Mhm.
good novels, more confrontation with the lack, which is the structure of
Lack.
the universe, right?
Did Vivienne confront you with the lack?
Yes, it did. And Vivienne, like, I don't read that many novels anymore. And I read it like in 1.5 sittings, I would say, because
Hmm.
there's not much good. I personally think. I mean,
You should make an everyday analysis like list of novels, like anti-Chat GPT novels.
we should no, but it is. I do actually think that this is like it is such a critique of the internet as it has become. It's interesting that it was seen as this like potentially emancipatory space, but of course, as soon as
Yeah.
it's realized, it's not that. But no, I absolutely think that like yeah, maybe we should because I know you have to go. We should conclude the conversation because we need more conversations. We need more questions. We need more nuance. We need more philosophy. We need more art. But it's more and more difficult to do it in a world where there's fewer and fewer resources for most people,
Yeah.
which sucks.
Right. The economic precarity that's then like translated into all of these other fields.
Yeah, the
Hmm.
economic precarity really fucks up the exchange of value towards spaces for art and the ability for people to participate in art. And yeah, but that's a whole other
So, yeah, that's the
conversation.
review. You're right. Um,
Cool.
thanks for talking to me about Viv.
No, thank you so much for coming on. And I'm really excited to read your next novel. Does it have a title yet?
The Moon Papers.
Moon Papers. That's a very Emily title.
Do you like it? I don't know. I'm not totally set on it. It might just be tentative.
Oh, and in terms of everyday analysis, Emily wrote this amazing introduction to our poetry pamphlet, Weird Material, which was her
And
title.
you read it aloud to a
I
group
read it
of
aloud and somebody cried.
Really?
Yeah, yeah, didn't I tell you this?
Oh, cool. I didn't know they cried.
Yeah,
No.
yeah, they cried. They're like, this is so beautiful. And it is. I read
Yeah.
it and it was like,
Maybe it was how you were reading it. It was
no, no, it was the
thank
worst.
you. I appreciate it. It was meant to be read by a fellow Virgo, clearly. The best sign.
The best
Um,
side.
well, I adore you. This was fun.
So, and thanks for coming on. And I always feel like I have to apologize because I do always intend for it to be like a question of the guest, and then I sort of can't stop talking myself.
It's fine.
So I'm like,
Is
yeah.
Pencil still there?
And
I
so
wanted Pencil to come
oh, she's
on.
like relaxing now, but she was sort of, it's funny
Oh,
because like the Zoom doesn't pick it up, but she was like tearing up paper and running around and yeah.
there's a bunny in Vivienne,
Yeah, yeah.
but much bigger than Pencil.
The pencil's really
She's
tiny.
little, right? Yeah.
She was like 300 grams when we got her. Now she's like 1.2 kilos, but I think this is the biggest extent of how she will be.
Skinny bunny.
Yeah, many. And she's a Netherland dwarf, I think.
Classy.
Small.
Netherland dwarf.
Yeah, Netherland dwarf.
I like that.
Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah, yeah, I'm one of those as well.
Same. All right. Bye, Helen.
Okay, bye. Thank you so much. Bye, everybody.
Bye,
Bye.
everybody.